This is a special Sunday where we're moving a little out of a comfort zone. We're inviting you to come to a forum after church. I see a couple of our panelists here, Charlie Black and Mary Lee. We're so happy that you can be with us. Ron Steiner, law professor at Chapman, but a member here as well at IUCC. I don't know if Jay is in the room. Jay, welcome. We're anxious to hear your words today. And also here to speak to us, to start us off, is the Reverend Hines. Ann is retired after 30-plus years as a Unitarian Universalist pastor. She has 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren in college. She's also been involved in anti-racism work, the death penalty, abolition, anti-war activities, and raising awareness about gun violence. And so, to begin, please welcome Reverend Ann Hines to our pulpit. Ann?
Thank you. And good morning. I am so grateful to Pastor Paul for inviting me to share this important day with you as you explore the painful but crucial issue of gun violence in America and what we as people of faith might do about it. As I drove here this morning, I entered this area called Woodbridge, and it brought back lots of fond memories for me and some nostalgia, because my parents, Gwen and Jim Felton, were some of the first residents here in Woodbridge many years ago when it was first being built, and it wasn't nearly as built up then as it is now. They have both since passed away, but they were very active in the Orange County community in a variety of ways when they lived here. In the description about me for this afternoon's panel, it indicates that I began speaking and demonstrating for what we call sensible gun laws after the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School back in 2013, where 20 children ages 6 and 7 years old, plus 6 adults, were gunned down by a young man who never should have had a gun in the first place because of his mental illness. He was known to have mental illness, but, and of course we know that most people with mental illness are not violent, but he was. That description of me, however, is not entirely accurate. I had begun preaching on this topic long before Sandy Hook. I had been preaching on it. I preached on it after the tragedy in Columbine and after the shootings in the theater in Aurora, Colorado, and just a few weeks later, the deaths by gunfire at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And I would often attend a vigil after those events, or sometimes even speak at those vigils, especially if members of my congregation were also attending. But it was an article that I read after Sandy Hook, and after Congress had once again refused to take any steps to rein in our love affair with guns in this country, that put me over the edge. I don't remember who wrote the article, but it essentially said that the reason no new laws would be getting enacted in this country was that while the NRA never lets up on their lobbying efforts, those of us calling for sensible gun laws didn't have the staying power that the NRA and other gun rights organizations had, that our commitment would rise after these horrendous events, but then when we didn't see any progress or when the furor died down, our commitment would wane. I was so outraged after reading that article, not by the article itself, but by the truth of it. the reflection of myself that it held up, that I marched myself off to a meeting of the newly formed chapter, San Fernando Valley chapter of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. I began helping out with presentations and protests in the community. I even, after retiring in 2014, served for a time as chair of that chapter. I would prove that article wrong. But before too long, I was called out of retirement to serve one of our UU congregations for just a year and a half as their interim minister, and once again, I turned my attention and my energies elsewhere. Just as that writer of that article had suggested, my passion for the work of gun violence prevention waned as my life got busier. But now I've re-entered retirement forever this time, and I have no excuses. I am told that in Africa, the Maasai warriors greet one another by asking, "Kasarian Ingera," and "How are the children?" But they are not inquiring about each other's own children. They are reminding one another that as warriors, their first duty is to all children in the community. Are they, the warriors, ensuring the peace and safety of the most vulnerable among them? That, they know, must be their first priority. And the traditional response is, all the children are well, assuring one another that they are carrying out their responsibility. What would we answer if we were asked that same question here in America? What would we say about the children's well-being if we knew that 7 of them are killed by gunfire every day? That works out to almost 1 child every 3.5 hours. Now think about that for a moment. It means that for those of us who have been here since earlier this morning for the first service and will stay through the forum this afternoon, that at least 1 child will have died from gun violence by the time we head home, and probably 2. And like most such deaths, it likely wouldn't have happened if we had had reasonable gun restrictions throughout the country. I find it astonishing and heartbreaking. And of course, there are even more adults killed by guns on a daily basis. On average, 91 every day, according to the organization Everytown for Gun Safety. And in an average month, over 50 women in America are shot to death by a current or former husband or boyfriend. And every one of these deaths leaves behind a circle of loved ones whose lives will never be the same. I imagine that some of you here this morning are part of that circle, as so many Americans have been touched by gun violence in some way. This afternoon at the forum that I really hope you'll be able to attend, we'll probably talk a lot about the public policy and the public health aspects of this issue, and those are very important. But it's also a religious issue. For what does it say about the soul of this country when we are willing to put at risk so many innocent people, especially children, just because some of our citizens don't want the same kinds of restrictions on their guns as are placed on their cars? What does it say that the manufacturers and owners of weapons whose sole purpose is to take away life are protected more by our lawmakers than are the lives of children? Now, I am sure some of you here are going to disagree with what I am saying, and that's fine. And I am sure that some of you even own guns, and that is fine too. None of us is trying to take away your guns. But I believe that every great religion, including yours and mine, admonishes us to put aside violence and choose life instead. Every great religion, including yours and mine, affirms that each of us carries within us the spark of God, of the Holy Spirit of life. Every great religion, including yours and mine, calls us to work for peace and justice, and to care especially for the most vulnerable among us, for those who have no voice. And I know that this particular UCC congregation has always felt called to be the peacemakers and the justice seekers. It is part of who you are. It is also part of how Unitarian Universalists see ourselves, and perhaps most particularly where it comes to the future of our children. Most of our UU congregations have replaced the Christian rite of baptism with what is called a child dedication, which normally occurs soon after a child is first born, though not always. But rather than dedicate the child to Unitarian Universalism, it is a time for the church community to dedicate ourselves to that child and to the children of the earth. In the ceremony that I've created, I ask the congregation to say, in part, we promise to do all we can to create a world that is safe, healthy, and free, a world of peace where you and all children can love and be loved throughout your lifetime. It is perhaps our way of saying, Kasarian Ingera, and how are the children? But would we not need to answer, the children are not well. The children are not well at all. For too many of them are dying because we have failed to protect them from lax and non-existent gun restrictions. And I think if we listen, we can hear the children calling to us, especially these children whose lives have been cut so short, so tragically, from gun violence. I think if we listen with our hearts, we could hear them imploring that we not forget them, that we give their lives meaning by working together as people of faith to end this violence, though I know it is not easy to stay at it. One of my favorite prayers begins, I am afraid of nearly everything, but most of all, I am afraid of what I might become, reconciled to injustice, resigned to fear and despair, lulled into a life of apathy. That fear of mine rises up every time I retreat from involvement in something I care about, as I retreated 1.5 years ago from my work for gun violence prevention. Apathy and non-commitment is always lurking around the corner, it seems. But I don't think I'm alone in this struggle to stay committed to this issue. I know how easily life can get in the way of our vows to put our words into action. That's why religious community is so important, because it's in our faith communities where we come together on a regular basis to worship, to shape and to be shaped by what is of worth to us, that we can be reminded of the work that still needs to be done, and where we can receive the comfort and the courage necessary to keep on with the struggle, and even when it may seem hopeless. because it is never hopeless. Never. According to a recent article in the New York Times, there are now 18 states that require universal background checks, 8 of them since Sandy Hook. And there are an additional 4 states, California being one of them, that have on their November ballots initiatives calling for reasonable gun laws, and they are all showing strong support in the polls. All of these successes are because of the work of people no different from you and me. And often that work has been done in their faith communities, just such as this one. And just look at what you're doing here today, devoting both your worship services and time this afternoon to this cause. That gives me great hope. That gives me faith. And it keeps my dedication alive. And who knows, perhaps you'll even begin a new ministry here at this church, a ministry of gun violence prevention. We sang earlier in that beautiful hymn the words, God of love, we weep and wonder at the violence all around. I believe that God is weeping as well, weeps with us every time a child is killed by gun violence. And perhaps God even becomes outraged with us, knowing how so many of those deaths could have been prevented. But there is no reason to wonder at the violence. We know why it continues, and we know what needs to be done to stop it. I believe that the God of love wants us to not only sing the words, but to shout, "This can be no more." And I believe that God stands with us in every moment as we embody that love through our words and our actions, to make our world a place where we can say with joy, all the children are well. May it always be so. Amen.